Joined now by Carrie Severino. She's Judicial Crisis Network's president and a former clerk to Justice Clarence Thomas. So, Carrie, you have been a Supreme Court clerk, and I went to law school, but I was nowhere near smart enough to be a Supreme Court clerk. So you will know and understand to an unbelievable degree. What was your reaction when you saw news that this Alito draft opinion had leaked? How stunning was it? Contextualize it for us, for those of us who will not have experienced what being a clerk and working at the Supreme Court is like.
Yeah, that was utterly jaw-dropping to see not just even a leak about, hey, we think this is what the votes are, this is the direction they're going, but like an entire draft opinion as circulated to the justices. So much so that like other clerks I know said they literally said this has to be a fake. There's no way it could be real because that would never happen. So until the Chief Justice confirmed it, they were like, nope, can't. I just don't believe it. When I was clerking, it was like you could not have ever left the building with a piece of paper like that. The only thing I could take out, like if I wanted to do work at home in the evening, was the filings and the things that had been already publicly filed for the court. So I could do my bagged reading, but that's it. Any internal documents never left the building in paper form, in digital form, nada. So the idea, and Congress is always leaking and the White House is always leaking. The Supreme Court, it just doesn't happen. Think about it like Bush versus Gore. Most controversial case in certainly that decade, probably in many decades, very tense. I heard clerks were like literally getting into fights, like physical fights over how upset they were about this case. And we didn't have a draft opinion for that, did we? We didn't. I don't even think we had a here's what the vote's going to be leak. So this is completely novel for the Supreme Court to have something like this. And I think it's going to be a long time, if ever, that the court and their internal processes can recover from something like this, let alone the threats to the justices that have been triggered by this type of leak.
Carrie, so immediately when the leak happens, a lot of us out there start trying to analyze who the leaker might be. And it's informed speculation to a certain degree, but nowhere near like what I imagine the Supreme Court clerk text chains were like. How would you assess where this leak was likely to come from? What did you and your former Supreme Court clerk colleagues think in terms of analyzing this when you saw the story?
Well, our immediate assumption is this has got to be a leak from one of the liberal clerks. I think a lot of people assumed that maybe someone like a clerk in Justice Sotomayor's chamber, because she seems to be particularly, on fire about this issue and just perceived as being a little more political than some of the others, but obviously not based on any real information, just like, wow, this seems like the kind of thing they might do. And I think you saw people on the right and the left presuming that this was a liberal clerk leaking it in order to try to impact the court, in order to try to trigger exactly the types of protests that we're seeing right now, in the hopes of impacting the justices. And I think that's maybe a nice way of putting it. I would say more threatening and intimidating the justices if it's coming from that side, because the difference between an opinion being leaked before it comes out and afterward is this is not just people saying, I'm really upset about this. It's trying to say they're upset about it in a way that will influence the justices to change their opinion, whether that's based on just purely seeing outrage or based on the implicit threats that come of like protesting in front of someone's private residence.
Hey, Carrie, it's Buck. The statute's pretty clear on this. This is not legal, what they are doing. And I'm wondering what the explanation is for why this is allowed to continue. My understanding is it's not legal under Virginia state law, and also on the federal side, judicial tampering. I mean, think about it this way. If there was a drug dealer, let's say, who was facing life in prison, a drug kingpin, and he had 10 of his guys standing outside of the judge's home waving signs saying, you better watch out, everybody would say, well, that's judicial intimidation. Why isn't this judicial intimidation?
Well, I really think it is. I mean, the kind of stuff that's going on here is not just limited to, hey, we want to, express that we're annoyed at your opinion. It's we want you to change your vote. And that is attempting to affect the direction of the court. And that, again, is assuming, I think the best of motives, because in worst case scenario, I mean, we've heard that Justice Alito is not returning to his home and has relocated to a different secure location. I mean, this is really disturbing. And what's even more disturbing is seeing the response from the White House and their refusal to condemn the idea of justices protesting at the private residences of these justices, some of whom have young children, right? So, I mean, this is a really outrageous thing. Over the weekend, there was so much outrage that I think they tried to walk it back a little, but they said, well, of course we want these to be peaceful and no threats or anything. It took them 4 days to even say that much. Before they were just like, they're very passionate. Like, let's let them protest. I think there's absolutely a place for protesting, for making your voice heard, but that place is in the public sphere, in front of the Supreme Court, in front of, things like that, not in front of someone's private home.
We're talking to Carrie Severino, Judicial Crisis Network president, former clerk to Justice Clarence Thomas. Okay, Carrie, so if you had a magic wand and you could wave it right now, we don't know what Chief Justice Roberts is going to do. Right now it's a 5-4, it appears, majority. Should they expedite the release of this opinion, given the danger that may be out there for the conservative the conservative justices, also probably the conservative clerks, and the overall atmosphere surrounding the Supreme Court? Is that the wrong decision? Should Chief Justice Roberts join on to keep this from being a 5-4 decision? You have a magic wand. What's the best way to restore some form of credibility and normalcy to the court in the wake of this leak?
Wow, if I've got a magic wand, let's make it 9-0 while we're at it, right? But, I think, so the Chief Justice has said, I don't want to do anything differently because of this leak. But I think that's a misconception of what's going on here. I think you shouldn't change your vote because of a leak. I am absolutely in favor of that. But I think under the circumstances, the court can expedite opinions when they recognize there's a serious reason to do so. They did that with the Texas heartbeat bill. That opinion came out in like 50 days, which is lightning fast for a significant Supreme Court decision to come out. They clearly put the heat on and got that out. They could do that here, especially because we know there's already a complete draft. Now, we don't know. There could have easily, we're talking about months in between February when this was passed around to the justices and May when it was leaked. So they already could have made a lot of, edits in between. There could have been justices saying, hey, let's, they can ask for anything from like, I'd rather phrase this differently or move this comma to, hey, let's add this argument or take out this one. So we don't really know what the current version the justices are working with. But I would say, guys, get your act together, get that signed. As long as once all 5 justices sign on, they could theoretically release it. Even if the dissent wasn't ready, they could say, okay, you know what? The dissenting opinion is just going to come out when the number of justices that are in the dissent are all agreed on it. Or they could lean on those justices, again, especially since their colleagues are actually being put, I think, in physical danger as a result of this. I would hope that all the justices would say, you know what? Let's put this to the top of our pile, get this done right now and get it out. And then, some of that pressure's off. There's still going to be people outraged about the opinion, frankly, whatever ends up happening with it. This is not going to be one of those opinions that just,
Carrie, how concerned are you that we could actually see a flip and that it would go 5-4 in the other direction and effectively the leak and pressure campaign and threats would have been successful?
Well, you know what? I hope, and I really do think that the nature of how outrageous this was for the justices would fortify the spines of any who are considering, that maybe this kind of outrage would be something that I would not want to see. Maybe they didn't want to see it, and I think none of the justices want to see this type of activity. But I would hope this would never be something that would make them switch their votes. Now, we know they have life tenure under the Constitution specifically to allow them to have that independence, to not have to be looking at the outside effects. Although obviously, when you have actual threats and things, that changes it whether you got life tenure or not, right? But I would hope that they would be able to stay firm. I would love it if the Chief Justice said, you know what, I'm going to join this opinion just to make the point that I'm not going to be bullied by these things, and I think recognizing too that he's not, trying to uphold Roe is simply not legally plausible if you're upholding the Mississippi law as well. It's just completely at odds with that decision. You kind of have to pick one or the other, and he's trying to have it both ways.
Sounds like Chief Justice Roberts, unfortunately. But Carrie Severino, everybody, Judicial Crisis Network president, former clerk to Justice Thomas. Carrie, thanks for joining us here. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks. Have a great day.
As promised, our friend Allie Beth Stuckey is with us now. She is host of the podcast Relatable, author of You're Not Enough, and a writer at World Magazine. Allie, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Can we start it? Because there's obviously so much. Biden administration imploding, inflation, abortion decision looming. We've got a lot we can talk to you about. But I just want to know, what are you hearing? You're plugged into this community. You know what it's like for the young moms out there. The baby formula shortage. I'm seeing people really freaked out about this because what are they supposed to do?
Yeah, this is terrifying in so many ways that I think a lot of people don't even consider. I am friends with people who are foster parents who have recently adopted. I have friends who have kids who have special allergies and special needs that require them to have a certain kind of formula. This is an insanely impactful and pervasive problem. I mean, this is your worst nightmare if you are a mom who is trying to feed your child, to get your child the nutrients that it needs. Like, bare minimum first priority as a mother is to take care of your child in this way. And you are literally helpless, especially if you are someone who maybe doesn't have the means that others do. If you have lots of dollars laying around, you might be able to stockpile some formula if you can find it, or you can order some expensive brands overseas. But for working class women, for the average woman, especially for a woman who is impoverished, it is almost getting impossible for them to feed their children. That is a very scary prospect.
Allie, thanks for coming on the show, by the way. What are moms being told, and dads who have to go out to buy this formula? What are they being told about how long this shortage is going to last, how much worse it might get? I mean, this is alarming on an incredibly high level for anybody out there that has raised kids and has had to buy formula, as you mentioned, because this is one of those things that it's hard to replicate with something else. What are moms being told?
Yeah, that's part of the anxiety, right, is that they're just kind of being told this vague answer. Supply chain issues, which we could talk about all the different possibilities and all of the different reasons causing that. Some of it also is a recall that happened at Abbott Labs. Unfortunately, there was contamination of some formula that led to the sickness of lots of babies and the death of 2 babies. And so that's scary. So there's just less formula in circulation, and they're not being told any answers as to really why, and then also when it's going to end. There are suppliers or stores like Target, like CVS, like Walgreens, saying that for the foreseeable future, they are just going to have to ration the formula. So I don't have any answers. The Biden administration doesn't seem to have any answers. The suppliers don't seem to have any answers. I wish I could say there's light at the end of the tunnel, but I just don't have that kind of positive vision right now.
Allie, also want to ask you your thoughts on the situation of the Supreme Court justices who have lunatics shrieking at them from their front lawns of their private, their homes, and an unwillingness, it seems, from most of the Democrat media. The White House just changed their position from, hey, people are upset, too bad, to, okay, maybe don't threaten Supreme Court justices. But this feels like a very combustible situation, and I think the unhinged and to some demonic components of the left are coming out for everyone to see.
100%. And it's not just the Supreme Court justices and the young children of justices like Kavanaugh and Barrett that are being, intimidated and threatened right now. We're also talking about people with far less security and far fewer places to go, like your pregnancy resource centers. Unfortunately, we've seen on Twitter pictures of these resource centers being vandalized. I mean, these are clinics, these are centers that are helping women no matter what they ultimately decide to do with their pregnancy. They are offering free pregnancy classes, free baby supplies, maternity clothes, all kinds of things. And as you said, these demonic pro-abortion activists, for whatever reason, feel that they need to vandalize and in some cases burn down these clinics because they are so rabid and intent on seeing more babies murdered. And it really is sad, but I hope people see more than they ever have that this is really a light versus darkness dichotomy more than it is a political battle.
Allie, I'm curious what you're hearing from moms, because I talked about this on the show on Thursday. I was out with a group of couples, a lot of different moms of a variety of different political persuasions. And what I found was I was just having a conversation with them about what their thoughts were on the Alito opinion leak. It's amazing to me that people who are pro-choice define themselves very strongly pro-choice. Almost all of them that I talked to said, well, no, I would never support an abortion in the 7th, 8th, or 9th month of pregnancy when the child is in many ways potentially able to survive outside of the womb. And similarly, people who said, hey, I'm 100% pro-life, obviously were okay with birth control. Everyone that I was talking with, they were okay with exceptions in the life of the mother, certainly, and incest and rape and other things. How much agreement, and this may be a surprise question, but it surprised me, there's actually a ton of agreement on abortion. And now that every state has to make decisions, I think Democrats are going to find when you go into the specific details of abortion, there isn't as much support for certainly all the way up to 9-month pregnancy as they're trying to argue through the media. Have you started to see those conversations take place maybe in a different way, that the shift has gone from should Roe v. Wade be the law of the land to, okay, what should abortion policy look like? Because I'm kind of intrigued by the reactions and responses when you have those conversations.
Well, you're absolutely right. And putting my own opinions aside, I'm really as anti-abortion as you can get. The average American is extremely what I would call moderate on this issue. You'll hear a lot of pro-choice activists say, well, the majority of people want women to have access to abortion. They support Roe v. Wade. But also the reality is that most people don't really understand what Roe v. Wade is. They think that if Roe v. Wade is overturned, then America is going to abolish abortion across the land. Most people in America do believe in exceptions, even if they consider themselves pro-life. Again, putting my own personal opinions to the side, that is just typical of the average American. But as you mentioned, most Americans also believe that there should be restrictions, especially when you get into the 2nd and 3rd trimester. And that really has been steady. I mean, the left has moved far left over the past 10 to 20 years for sure. But when it comes to abortion, the average American really has stayed the same in what they consider to be good abortion policy. So if the left really cares about democracy as much as they say they do, if they really are so confident that Americans want access to abortion, then let's put it up to a vote, which is exactly what would happen across the states. Of course, if Roe v. Wade is overturned, it would be our democratic processes playing out in state legislatures.
Allie, I feel like we're making you our unofficial but semi-official mom whisperer here in real time, because I got another mom question for you. And that is with the school issue that we've seen and teaching of CRT and all of the back and forth at the school board meetings. Are you getting the sense that we know moms were fired up, right? That would be, we saw that in Virginia. We've seen that in some key indicators, including in some elections, let's call it 6-7 months ago. But are they still fired up? Do you think that the shutdowns of schools for COVID, the teaching of CRT, and now the teaching of the trans agenda might surprise some folks with how much that motivates parents, moms, but parents in general to show up at the polls in this midterm?
Well, you can absolutely bet that that's exactly what Democrats are trying to distract women and moms from, using this abortion issue and trying to stoke rage around abortion. They're trying to make them forget about what Democrats did to their children over the past couple of years. I don't think that it's going to work. I don't think abortion mobilizes independent or moderate women as much as they think that it does. And so I do think it's an issue. I do think that the radicalism in school curriculum is going to be an issue. I think the economy, inflation, the lack of supplies like baby formula that moms are able to find, I think that that's going to be far more mobilizing than the abortion issue for sure. And I think as the fall comes and as we see more school board meetings, that you are going to see that energy kind of re-up once again. But look, it's going to take a lot of work on the conservative side to make sure that moms are still aware of that. Because, look, there's a lot of propaganda, especially, I like to say that white woman Instagram, especially progressive white woman Instagram, is like the biggest purveyor of political propaganda that exists. And so it's going to take a lot of effort to reach those moms and to educate and inform those moms to make sure they know what's going on and why it matters. I think it's possible, but it's going to take a lot of effort.
Allie, we agree. Suburban women hold the key to the 2022 and the 2024 elections. We need to get you on again sometime soon. Appreciate it.
Yes, thanks so much.
That is Allie Beth Stuckey. I encourage you to check out her podcast, Relatable.
We've got Doug Blair with us now. He's a news producer at the Daily Signal and co-host of the Daily Signal podcast. Doug, thanks for being with us.
Hey, guys. Thanks so much for having me on.
So our understanding is you were out there watching some of these protests, nice house you got there, Supreme Court Justice kind of protests. You know what I mean? People are worried about this. People worried about the security, the safety of these justices. What'd you see?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I was out there watching these protesters march around and find their way suddenly in front of the houses of some of the most important justices in the land. It was horrifying. I mean, these people are so angry. They're so spiteful. And the fact that they thought it was appropriate for them to go to the houses, the private residences of some of these justices, it's literally only for one reason. It's to intimidate them. It's to force them to think that they're in danger. And if they don't vote a certain way on Roe v. Wade, they're going to do something. And we don't know what that something is, but it sure ain't good.
Doug, what is the overall vibe of the crowd that you found yourself in outside of these homes? Did it feel dangerous? Did it feel potentially violent? How sustained do you get the sense that this is going to be? For those of us who haven't been around these crowds, take us inside their midst and tell us what it felt like.
So I've been to a couple of these protests right now, and it depends on which person it is. Justice John Roberts felt like your very average, like, I'm mad, I'm going to protest in front of somebody's house who I don't like, which is ideally not what you're doing, but this is where we're at now with the modern left. They were upset, but they weren't that upset. I mean, it got so much worse. When they got to Brett Kavanaugh's house, something in the air just changed. You could feel it turn like a switch. They just viewed this person as like a monster, as subhuman, and they wanted him to know that they were out there and they hated his guts. So I heard one protester yell and scream, "I can see you, Brett." I hope to God he was wrong. I hope that Brett wasn't actually at his house, that Justice Kavanaugh wasn't at his house. But it was terrifying. I was scared for the police officers who were there because this crowd was just so agitated and so angry.
Doug, what was the security presence like? Were there police officers that were doing crowd control of these protesters? We were discussing earlier in the program that this would seem to be a violation of law in the state of Virginia and the state of Maryland, respectively. But were there police on scene, and what was that like?
Absolutely. So there were thankfully police on presence. There was a police presence at the houses. I think it's kind of scary, though, the fact that there had to be a police presence at these places, because it just shows you how far down the discourse in America has gotten, where these protesters felt like the response to a decision that they might not like from the Supreme Court is to go and intimidate these justices. I think it's just terrifying that we've reached this point where the left feels empowered to go and harass people where they live to try and get what they want. And thankfully there were police officers there, but I shudder to think what would have happened if there weren't.
You know, Doug, one of the things we were talking about and discussing is the challenges associated with enforcing these laws, whether it's Maryland, whether it's Virginia, whether it's D.C., where some of these justices may live. What do you think would have happened based on being in that crowd if there had started to be arrests made? Does this make protest more likely going forward? Does it make martyrs of the people who are arrested? Or would that nip these protests in the bud and the people that you saw are unlikely to keep showing back up? How would you assess that aspect of these protests?
It's funny you asked me that, because I actually had a circumstance where I was watching these protests happen, and the police showed up in full force. So about 5 cop cars showed up outside of Justice Kavanaugh's house, and you wouldn't even believe it that there have been 100 people there, because they scattered to the wind. They were terrified of the police coming to arrest them. And I think that they're terrified overall, too, of this movement that's happening right now, right? I think America is sort of seeing a revitalization of a culture of life that has been gone for 50 years since Roe v. Wade was formally put into place. I think that these protesters feel as if they're seeing the demise of an abortion-type regime that is just it has been existing in this country for far too long. And I think when they saw the cops show up, they recognized that, time was not on their side anymore. They were going to lose this fight, and that they didn't want to be around to see what the results were going to be.
Speaking of Douglas Blair, he's a producer of the Daily Signal, co-host of the Daily Signal podcast. Doug, is the expectation that there are just going to be ongoing protests every day, or are they going to try to camp out somewhere in the neighborhood, Occupy style? What's going to happen is based on what you're hearing from people who are there and from the authorities who are trying to keep it relatively orderly.
It's an excellent question because I don't see these ending anytime soon. So there's a planned protest for tomorrow. They're going to go to all the conservative justices' houses. So far, they've only hit Alito, Roberts, and Kavanaugh. There's plans for tomorrow to hit the rest of them. But I easily could see this going on for a long, long time. This is not a group that gives up. Yesterday, I actually got some very concerning footage of Black Bloc and Antifa members who had attended these protests. All of the other protests I had seen, there were angry people for sure, and they were definitely upset, and they did inappropriate things in front of the houses of the justices, but there was no Black Bloc presence. I'm from Portland, Oregon, so I know exactly what happens when Antifa and Black Bloc show up to a protest. It gets real bad real quick. So that was incredibly disturbing for me to see that these people were attending these protests. And I do want to note one thing very quickly. As we are starting to see these protests get more and more aggressive and more threatening to the lives of the justices, I think it's despicable how we haven't seen a response from the administration to this. We saw a very lukewarm, very milquetoast statement come out from President Biden and Jen Psaki about how, violence is unacceptable in protesting. Well, sure, that's fine. But I think we need actual condemnation of what is happening right now in these particular protests. It's not acceptable for you to go to somebody's house and threaten them and harass them to get the judgment that you want.
Doug, last question here for you. You're talking about the duration of these complaints and these protests. What sense do you get, if any, of the neighbors? Because if I were living in these neighborhoods, regardless of what my politics would be, I would be really, really angry about people taking over my neighborhood and chanting political slogans regardless of what they were, because I'm trying to get my kids to Little League. I'm trying to get in and out of school. Did you get any sense for the neighborhoods that these justices live in and what that response might be?
Well, guys, it's funny you mentioned that because these are suburbs of Washington, D.C. Washington is clearly one of the most blue cities in the country. It's very, very, very left-leaning. So sometimes the neighbors would come out and join the marches. We would see people who would come out of their houses. They would cheer. They would clap. As I mentioned, some would begin to walk with the protesters. One of the protesters in charge of the Kavanaugh protest was his neighbor. This was a person who thought that he was an evil person. And I think that's just so sad that we're at this point in the country where your neighbor, somebody that you should at least have friendly terms with, or at least, interact with, is deciding that the best way to deal with you is to go outside and to harass you where you live. It seems like that is just such a strange place for us to be right now. And the neighbors, the fact that they were joining in on it, I think just really adds fuel to that fire that this is a completely inappropriate way to do it, that they were in on the game.
Doug, appreciate the time, appreciate the work. We'll continue to follow you and your coverage of these potential protests. Appreciate it, my man.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
As promised, we're joined right now by Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee. Senator, thanks for coming back. Appreciate it.
It is good to be with you. Thank you so much.
So I'm sure you saw the President Biden's speech on the economy just a couple of hours ago. Seemed like a lot of blame deflection, some talking points about lowering prices, not clear on how they would actually achieve that. What were, as a legislator, as a member of the U.S. Senate, what were your biggest takeaways, Senator?
Biden does not want to admit that this is his fault. It is his problem. All you have to do is look at what the costs were in 2020 and compare that to now. When you look at a carton of eggs, it's up 43%. When you look at coffee, it's up over 140 cents for a pound of coffee beans. When you look at milk, it is up. When you look at bread, it is up, and it's going up even more with the situation in Ukraine. Now, why did this not happen under President Donald Trump? It is because We were energy independent. There was a reduction in regulation. We were holding China to account for how they dealt with us on trade and other issues. And other countries knew they needed to be our friend and not our adversary.
Senator, appreciate you coming on. There's been a lot of talk about the leaked opinion from Justice Alito. In the event that that opinion is accurate and Roe v. Wade is overturned and given the power back to the states, you are in the Senate. Do you think the Senate should have any role then, or do you believe it should just go back to the states and let every state make their own determination?
Clay, what we should do is have the states step forward. This is what conservatives have fought for years, to see Roe overturned and then to see the issue of regulations and restrictions on abortion go back to the states. Now, are there some areas where the federal government does have some jurisdiction? Of course, when it comes to report language in budget documents, the Hyde Amendment language, the Mexico City policy, yes, those components are there, making certain that no taxpayer funds are expended for abortion. There's also the opportunity to do a plussed-up tax credit for expectant moms. Those are areas where the federal government will have a say. But when it comes to the regulations and restrictions, the federal government, federal legislators need to give the states the opportunity to exercise the authority they've been asking for and that conservatives have been asking for the states to have for decades.
We're speaking to Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee. Senator, your colleagues and you, of course, passed a bill to expand security for Supreme Court justices and for their families. There are ongoing protests, very aggressive ones, at the homes of these members of the Supreme Court, obviously targeting people based upon perceived political ideology of these justices. So do you think that that is sufficient? And what do you think about the DOJ role in enforcing the federal statute that says that you're not allowed, as a matter of law, to intimidate judges to try to bring about a different outcome?
The federal statute should be enforced, and DOJ should move forward with going out there, rounding up these people that are parading in the streets, blocking the neighborhoods where someone who is a Supreme Court justice lives. This is against the law. There is a federal statute that is there, 18 U.S.C. 1503. People can look it up. This prohibits this type of using this activity in order to influence the outcome of a judicial decision. So the step we took is an important step. My hope is that the House will join us in this. It is something that Senator Cotton and I had supported last year. We were joined by others on the Republican side of the aisle to provide the type of security that a judge needs. You know, we had a federal judge last year, I think it was about 15 months ago, whose son was shot when he opened the front door of their home, thinking that he was opening the door to a delivery man, and it turned out to be someone who was trying to shoot the judge.
Senator, I don't know if you've seen this news. It just came down a little bit earlier today, but I know we've had conversations about this with you before as it pertains to the NBA in China. But for people out there who have forgotten, the NBA pulled their All-Star game out of Charlotte, North Carolina over a transgender bathroom bill. They now, the NBA, Senator, is going to the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, to play basketball games in the NBA. The UAE punishes homosexuality with death in some cases. What do you think about these woke corporations that lecture America and will tell us what laws we can and cannot pass here, but then they'll go overseas to countries where homosexuality is potentially punished by death, show up and play and not uphold American values at all?
It's astounding to me to see how these corporations continue to kowtow to the Chinese Communist Party, how they will set aside their beliefs and principles in order to chase the dollar. What they're looking at is what they perceive to be a lucrative market. And in the interest of profit, they are saying, okay, we will go over here and we will play these games because we think it's going to be a revenue stream for us. And look at what has happened in China. They're in Xinjiang, where they have their practice academies and they have their facilities, and they have Nike merchandise licensed, NBA licensed merchandise being made by slave labor. And they say absolutely nothing about any of that other than the Chinese people like basketball. And now you see them moving forward, as you said, a new market, a new opportunity for them to make more money. So again, they set aside their beliefs, and they have one set of standards in the U.S., they have another set of standards globally. Instead of saying, we are the NBA from the United States of America, and we're going to stand against these human rights violations. We're going to stand against slavery, which is what they should do. They should be ambassadors for truth and for freedom and for consistency and for pursuing your dreams. And that is not what they choose to do because they're chasing the profit.
Senator Blackburn, in just a couple of weeks' time, Title 42 was set to end at the U.S.-Mexico border, the CDC authority that had been used to turn away a pretty large percentage of illegal migrants over the course of the pandemic. A federal judge had temporarily blocked it, but it seems it's just a matter of time before it is removed. The Title 42 authority is gone, and then everyone expects a massive surge of illegal crossings at the border. Can you just tell us, what are the expectations of people like you in the Senate, and what's going to happen once that expires?
Once that expires, you're going to see a rush to the border. Now, the estimate is that we will go from 6,000 illegal crossings a day to 18,000 illegal crossings a day. This is something that has the potential to completely overrun our Border Patrol. What we are aware of is that the cartels, having been given a 6-week lead time that this was going to happen, the cartels are working globally. They are lining up people from across the globe. Indeed, last year, we had people from 160 different countries that showed up at our border to seek asylum. So the cartels are working globally. They are in the process of moving vast numbers of people to the southern border. Then they're going to begin to move them to the border crossings and push them into U.S. control. Our concern is for the safety at that border. Now, I want you to think about this. When I saw this 18,000 number, I thought, my goodness, how does this relate to my state of Tennessee? Well, in the state of Tennessee, we have 345 cities and towns. Out of that number, 90% are 18,000 or less in population. I looked up the number when it comes to Illinois. Also there, it was about 90% were 18,000 or less. So you can say you've got a typical Tennessee, the population equivalent of a typical Tennessee town or the equivalent of a typical Illinois town or any other state. I've pulled it for just about every state. And that is going to be coming to our southern border for an asylum claim every single day. So the question is, how long can our Border Patrol sustain this?
Senator, last question for you. I know you're working on protecting kids online. We have seen, certainly in the wake of COVID, the overall mental health of children taking a precipitous decline that has been occurring really for the basically the rise of social media in general has not been healthy to our overall teenagers' mental health. What are you trying to do to help protect them?
Yes, of course, I've got legislation. I have the Open App Market bill that's ready to be marked up on the Senate floor, the Kids Online Safety Act that is ready to go through at Senate Commerce Committee. In addition to that, we have pulled together a parent's guide for a way they can increase the protections for their children online. You know, Clay, one of the things that we were hearing a good bit about from parents and grandparents was their concern of what children are being exposed to when they are online, with it being pedophiles and drug dealers and some of the harms that are coming from bullying online. Summer is coming up. We were getting more questions from individuals on this issue. So my team and I pulled together a guide, and people can get it from us on social media, on our website. This is to help parents and grandparents, caregivers of kids, to know how to help those children take that phone, set those privacy guidelines, and be able to more effectively monitor what children are being exposed to when they get online.
Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, everybody. Senator, appreciate you. Thanks so much.
You got it. Take care. Bye-bye.
We are joined now by David Marcus, who has done many things in his life, including being a theater actor. He's also Brooklyn-based columnist and author of Charade, The COVID Lies That Crushed a Nation. David, we appreciate you making the time to join the show here. But I wanted to play this audio for you to see what you thought of this. On Broadway, there was fury over a mask not being worn correctly, and I just want to let you react as a theater guy to what your reaction would be to this. Let's play it.
Please put your masks over your noses. Oh, do you want me to go put a mask on right now? Did I have a mask on during the show? Do you want me to put a mask on? Because I will. Your mask protects me so that I can perform. Push your mask over your nose. That's why you're in the theater. That is the rule. If you don't want to follow the rule, get the out!
Woo! Get out!
By the way,
you are that you do not respect the people that are sitting around you. Salary. You pay my salary.
this is my wife's biggest fear, I think, probably, Buck, if she took me to a Broadway play, that I wouldn't be wearing my mask correctly, and I just started getting screamed at by an actress on the stage. David, when you hear that, your reaction is what?
Yeah, it's amazing. It is the perfect symbol of why theater is basically dead in the United States of America, because theaters don't want to put people on stage who are going to do an entertaining show for you anymore. They want to put people on stage to lecture you about how you should live, right? Don't forget the cast of Hamilton lecturing Vice President Pence, right?
Yeah.
That's what this industry has become. I spent 15 years in the New York theater scene. And listen, man, Hollywood's progressive, but I mean, Hollywood's the National Review compared to the New York theater scene. And they've destroyed an industry. And that was just a perfect, whiny, screaming example of exactly how they've done it.
I mean, by the way, David, great to have you on the show, man. I live right next to, I walk past a Broadway theater every time I go to and from my apartment. And there's a line of people outside. There's these mask minders that have their masks on outside, mind you, who walk up and down the line. They also do this for the Colbert show, whatever, same thing. The mask minders make sure you are masked up in line outside before you go in, and then the ushers, from what I understand, I talked to a friend who went to a Broadway show recently. They, you know, if you're like probably talking or being annoying, things that actually bother normal people, that's not the big deal. If your mask drops down, you get one warning, and then they come over and basically say, well, you know, do you want to be expelled from the theater? I mean, why would anyone put themselves through this is what I wonder. Like, how can anyone, David, the people that are going to these theaters in New York, and there's some other places across the country where I think this still exists, but nowhere like Broadway, they're going to crowded restaurants and bars before and after they sit in the Broadway theater without masks on.
No, look, none of it makes any sense, of course. But again, I think it's down to an American arts community that are just rule followers that don't even make art anymore. They just kind of like pat people on the heads for having the right views about, race and gender and masks. I mean, when I started doing theater in the 1990s in New York, the last thing we were ever doing was thinking about wearing a mask or not getting sick. We were artists. We were dangerous. These people are about as dangerous as Elmer's glue.
David, we were just talking about off air because Buck obviously is in New York City. Allie, our producer, a lot of our staff are there, and we're doing a 1-year anniversary event in New York City soon. And are you concerned as someone who lives in Brooklyn that with COVID cases ticking back up, with the Biden White House talking about the midterm variant that might suddenly cause 100 million more cases, you still got 2-year-olds that have to wear masks in New York? To Buck's point, you got actors and actresses lecturing people from the stage in Broadway productions for not wearing their masks correctly. Are you concerned as the summer comes to a close in the next several months and we move towards the fall that insanity is going to return its full grip of fascist power to New York City, the place that you live?
Oh yeah, of course I'm concerned. It's not just the place I live; it's the place that I love, and it's happened too many times. I mean, there were too many times when I'd see Buck and I'd say, Buck, I think we turned the corner here, right? Nope. So yeah, I am very concerned. I will say though that on the basic institutional level, the freak out for the most part is calming down. Like, my 11-year-olds had COVID recently, and a year ago in terms of school, that would have been, the end of the world and everything. And it's just not anymore. So I do think that the people who run the institutions and most of the New Yorkers don't want to go back to that. But look, if our governor says you're going back, we're going back, man. We learned that lesson, right?
It's crazy. David Marcus is a columnist for the New York Post, author of Charade, The COVID Lies That Crushed a Nation. David, I don't know if you saw it or heard it, but Fauci got an honorary doctorate at the University of Michigan. I guess it was over this past weekend, and there was uproarious applause for this guy, like standing ovation. And there's a part of me that I'm never going to let this go until the truth about Fauci becomes the overwhelming lore of the land, if you will. Like, I just refuse to let this guy, not just as a New Yorker, a lot of people listening in cities across the country had to deal with the lunacy as well. But in New York, it feels particularly personal, the Fauci crap.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely does. I mean, it doesn't help that the guy's from South Brooklyn. But, listen. There is a certain percentage of the American people who went to such bizarre, crazy extremes, not leaving their apartment, washing their groceries, not touching their face, all of these things, right, who bought completely into it, who are never going to be psychologically capable of admitting that that was a mistake, of saying, I refused to hug my grandmother for 2 years. Oops. Right? There's a lot of people who are just never – that's a big thing to have to face. And I think a lot of people are just not going to do it. We already have the studies, guys, right? We have the Johns Hopkins study. We have other studies. We know that Florida didn't have vastly more deaths than New York and did way, way better economically. The results of this whole thing are in. There's just a bunch of Americans who are never going to accept it.
Speaking of that, David, I'm sure a lot of people saw the Bill Gates news where Bill Gates basically, along with everybody else who's gotten 4 COVID shots, feels obligated to say when he tests positive, I'm so thankful for my COVID shots because otherwise this would be so much worse. I think most reasonable people out there, and I put this tweet out yesterday, Buck, if you got a shot for something 4 times and you still got it, you would think, what in the world's going on? How awful is this COVID shot? Will people, David, ever acknowledge that much of what they have done, whether it's masks, whether it's getting a billion COVID shots, that they really haven't done anything to alter the risk analysis? 2-year-olds wearing masks, the requirements in New York have done nothing. You just mentioned the divergence between Florida and New York, and all of New York has done, and many blue state cities and regions have destroyed their economy with no comparative health benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that Gates said, this might have been the same interview, but I believe it was in the last week, was, he said, well, we couldn't possibly have known at the beginning that the infection fatality rate was much lower than we thought. You know who knew that on, I believe, March 7th, 2020? Was Donald Trump, who did an interview with Sean Hannity where he said he had a hunch that fatality rate was much, much lower. Why? Because we weren't testing asymptomatic people who don't show any illness. Yep. Donald Trump was absolutely right. That was early March 2020. So this idea that Bill Gates, with everything he has at his disposal, didn't know this, it really just shows you what was going on here.
Check out Charade, the COVID lies that crushed a nation. David Marcus. David, great to have you on, my friend. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, guys. Be well.
Our friend Vivek Ramaswamy is with us now. He's the founder and executive chairman of Strive and the author of the very excellent book, Woke Inc. Vivek, great to have you on.
How you doing?
I'm good, man. Look, before we talk about the solution to a form of corporate wokeness, a very powerful, very broad scale one, can you put into just layman terms for all of us the problem here when it comes to wokeness, woke capital, and how it affects places, massive asset managers, financial institutions like BlackRock, State Street? What's going on?
Yeah, so look, I think that there is a fiduciary duty problem here where what's happening with these large asset managers, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, you said them, they manage over $20 trillion. That is more than the GDP of the United States. But here's the problem. That money belongs to everyday citizens whose capital they're using to advocate for policies in corporate America that most of those everyday citizens would disapprove of. And I think that is the greatest fiduciary betrayal of our time that no one has paid attention to, no one has woken up to, and certainly no one has stepped up to solve. That's the problem we're stepping up to solve. And it runs pretty deep, and I'll tell you how deep it runs is I think it's gotten so bad that it borders on an antitrust problem. Yeah, the Arizona Attorney General has actually launched an antitrust investigation. He called it boldly, in my opinion, and possibly correctly, the greatest antitrust violation, the biggest antitrust violation in history, where I'll just run you through a thought experiment here. Imagine the CEOs of, say, Exxon and Shell and Chevron got together in a room and decided that they were going to cut gas production and gas prices at the pump spike as a result. That'd be the stuff of movies, right? People are walking out with handcuffs. That's not what's happening here, but it's pretty close, where the top asset managers in the world who own those same firms are basically mandating that they do the same thing, and somehow we celebrate that as ESG. I think that's a problem. And so what we're doing is we're bringing a different voice to the table, saying that, you know what, if you're a company, you should focus exclusively on delivering excellent products and services to your customers, not on political agendas and not on social agendas. And I hope that's going to be good for restoring the heart of our economy.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show. The book was fantastic, Vivek. And I actually have been, I'm going to be honest with you, until you started raising the red flag here and pointing out some of these issues, I went and did my own research. And the guy who's probably the most powerful in America that most people don't know in terms of having influence here on corporate woke politics is Larry Fink. He is the CEO of BlackRock. And I think people are still learning what all of this means. Can you explain where Larry Fink, a guy who is the CEO of BlackRock, derives his power from and what he's able to do basically to bend many of these companies towards his own political will when many people out there are not even aware of the power that he wields?
Yeah, and look, I'll quote Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett, who said, Larry Fink is not my emperor more recently. Yeah. I think CEO is an inappropriate title. Emperor might be more appropriate. So what happened here? Let's take a walk through history lane here of the last decade and a half. After the 2008 financial crisis, right, there was a new demand of American capitalism saying that greed is no longer good. We need to find a new model. Larry Fink is the guy who stepped into that void and turned that into an opportunity, who said that, you know what, we just have to play a different game here that we call this stakeholder capitalism. The old left used to be the Occupy Wall Street left, knocking on our doorsteps. Let's put them to one side by now start talking about social responsibility and preach about the racially disparate impact of climate change after you fly in a private jet to Davos. This is pretty good work. You blow a smoke screen that distracts people from the essence of what they were mad about and use corporate power to actually advance the very progressive agendas that used to come after corporate power in the first place. And it turned out he used that as a marketing tool to create the world's largest asset manager today, managing over $10 trillion. And what they do is they show up as the shareholder and say that, you know what, Milton Friedman might have said that you, the CEO, owe a duty to the shareholders and you shouldn't be pushing social agendas. Well, guess what? I am the shareholder, and I'm telling you that you must push these social agendas, or else I'm going to dock your pay, or else I'm going to fire you as CEO, or else I'm going to replace your board directors. And so most CEOs bend the knee and do it. A really practical example, Disney, people think that this guy is just bending the knee to progressive employees. Well, not so fast. It's actually a deeper problem. You look at the top shareholders of Disney, it's none other than those big three, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. So this runs pretty deep. And you think we live in a system of free market capitalism with competition. Well, guess who the top shareholders of Microsoft and Apple are? Competitors, right? Or Coke and Pepsi, or let's just say Shell and Exxon, or Chevron. These are supposed to be competitors in the economy. Turns out they all have the same top shareholders. That's the problem here. And so what I'm aiming to expose, and the problem not only to expose but to solve, is that actually even though folks like Larry Fink or BlackRock claim to be the shareholders of those companies and dictate what those companies do, actually they're not the real shareholder. The real shareholders are the firefighters, the nurses, the doctors, the small business owners of this country who unknowingly see their money directed through their 401k accounts, their pension fund accounts, et cetera, to the hands of these firms that are voting their shares and advocating for policies in the boardroom that would make their blood boil if they actually knew what was going on, but they don't. And that's why I think transparency is going to be the key here. And that's why I think though we have a big mountain to climb, and believe me, it's a big mountain because they have BlackRock and other firms have mastered the lobbying game, have mastered the game of government capture. Look at the number of BlackRock alumni that staff the administration and the White House and the Treasury Department and the Council of Economic Advisors. It is crony capitalism today, so it is a big hill to climb. But the thing we have on our side is that at the end of the day, the voices of the American people and the desires of the American people, not just as citizens but as shareholders, are demanding, once they're aware of it, a new direction. That's what we're providing.
We're speaking to Vivek Ramaswamy. Woke Inc. is his book, and he's the founder of Strive Capital. And to that end, more on the solution, Vivek, which you're trying to build. You've already raised $20 million, I believe, for this venture. What's it going to do, and how does it affect the folks out there? I mean, as you mentioned, if you got a 401k, it's probably with one of these financial giants. You want to build an alternative to those woke financial gargantuan companies.
Yeah, so look, that's just the seed capital. The Wall Street Journal broke the story, so we ended up announcing it a little bit earlier than expected. But at the end of the day, we should probably talk again in the third quarter of this year, because that's when we're going to launch our first product. And these are going to be, products that live out our mission, that allow everyday shareholders to have a choice, that give them an opportunity to be able to help us realize our mission of bringing a different voice to the table in corporate America. So I'm limited in what I can say about it right now, but let's come back in the third quarter when we said we're going to launch our first product. And I hope that this is the beginning of a long journey that actually represents the voice that most Americans want to bring to corporate America, which they don't want capitalism to be political. They don't want the places where they shop or where they work or where they invest to be political. And you know what? I think that, it's really important to me, too, that this is not just a left-wing or a right-wing movement. This is about reviving the heart and soul of American capitalism itself, is that by depoliticizing the private sector, I think the thing that we're going to be able to do is hopefully recreate solidarity between different people, irrespective of whether they're on left or right or black or white. We come together in an apolitical private sector that's supposed to bring us together. We lost that with the rise of stakeholder capitalism and BlackRock-led capitalism over the last decade. We want to restore a new type of capitalism, the classical kind of capitalism at the heart of American capitalism in the next decade ahead. So I'll be happy to say more about that in a few months.
I think your battle's an important one. Also, do you believe that there was a significant message sent based on what you wrote about in Woke Inc. when Ron DeSantis fired back against Disney and basically let it be known that the right was not just going to continue to kowtow to a tiny percentage on the left that is woke that had been driving the trajectory of our country?
Yeah, I think it's been a powerful message. And Disney is just a great example to look at where there's good survey data on this, where over 60% of their own customers were put off by their decision. Okay, so if we were a shareholder of Disney, the thing we would tell Disney is knock it off. 3 words to Bob Chapek, knock it off. You're alienating your customers. Customer volume is down. Your stock is down more than the S&P 500 over the same period, and you have had clear losses of business benefits in the state of Florida. That's not what you should be doing if you're focusing on excellence for your customers. And yet the top 3 shareholders of Disney today don't give them that message. Instead, if anything, if you read between the lines of their comments in other contexts, it actually seems to encourage them to exactly take the kinds of harmful positions that they have. So, I do think there's a room for political responsiveness and even legal responsiveness here. But actually, the solutions that I prefer the most are competition through the market itself. All state actions have unintended consequences, even ones that are necessary to be taken. That's why I generally prefer, whenever possible, let's sort these things out through the marketplace of ideas and through the market itself, and actually leave it to consumers to make the decisions. And I think that's going to be the way that we hope to reform the asset management industry. And not just the asset management industry. That is the one industry that's upstream of every industry in the American economy, which is what my real motivation is.
I think the battle that you're fighting is an incredibly important one. I encourage you to check out Woke Inc. It's a fantastic book. He is Vivek Ramaswamy, and he is fighting the battles that many of us need to be fighting in both the marketplace of ideas and also the capitalistic marketplace in general. Look forward to talking to you again, Vivek.
Thank you for having me, guys. Talk to you.